Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. In our previous session, we were discussing the third mantra, the third verse from this Shvetashvatara-Upanishad. Te dhyana yoga nugata apashyan devatma shaktim swagunair nigudham yah karanani nikhilani tani kalatma yuktanyadhitishthtyekah. Let's once again read the translation. Those who followed the yoga of meditation saw the energy which is veiled by its own qualities, the three gunas, and which is the very self of the radiant one, Deva, who alone presides over all the causes listed above, from time to Atman, the indwelling consciousness. We had already discussed the first part of this mantra, in which the mantra speaks about the energy aspect, Shakti. That's the first part. Those who followed the yoga of meditation saw the energy which is veiled by its own qualities, the three gunas, and which is the very self of the radiant one. And by radiant one is understood consciousness. The other part, the second part, after this, is about the radiant one, consciousness. Last time I explained that, and I've been explaining this again and again, that Sankhya view of energy and consciousness is that they are completely two very distinct and separate eternal entities. Vedanta, the Upanishads, as we can see here, which is the very self of the radiant one. So energy, which even though, and Sankhya was not being illogical, energy is the cause of all movement. And this movement does not seem to be guided by consciousness. It's just happening. So energy is just there. And consciousness doesn't move anything. Consciousness is merely a mere presence. So they seem, in their property, in their nature, they seem very opposite to each other. One is completely unconscious, and that's why even the word unconscious is sometimes used for energy, and the other one is the light of consciousness. It's that inner light of consciousness. So they are very different. Yet, the Upanishadic view is that yes, they seem very different, but they seem opposite, just like the two sides of the same coin. Completely opposite, but two descriptions of the same reality. And this is why last time when I said that the accusation of Vedantins of Sankhya is that your concept of energy and consciousness is like, does anyone remember? Is like a blind and no legs. Yes. Because on one side, consciousness is like no legs, no movement, it cannot move. And energy in which there is no consciousness, there is no conception. It can move, but there is no conception. But the picture of the Upanishads is that both are the same. Energy is experienced from a first person's perspective as consciousness. And from a third person's perspective, it is consciousness and its evolution. If you look at energy like this, you experience it as objects, as energy and as objects which arise out of that energy. But if you look within oneself, go into the very core of that energy, you experience it as consciousness. So it's one and the same thing. And since most of the Indian religious mythological symbology has symbolical representations have evolved out of these philosophical concepts. The most famous one is Ardhanarishvara, in which Shiva and Parvati, they are shown as one single person, but half female and half male. But the point is that even though they are separate, they are still one and not two. They are still totally one. That oneness is their oneness is what is important for the Upanishadic. So they seem separate, and that's also at the foundation of the Tantra practices, where originally Kundalini, which means Shakti, and Shiva, which is present in the Sahasrara, they are one and the same, but in the process of creation they become so separate, so distinct from each other, that one is the perceiver and the other one is the entity which is being perceived. So this distinction, this duality between the perceiver and the perceived is apparent to all of us, but the idea is to unite, to bring about their union once again, the union of the perceived and the perceiver. And that's why in the Tantra practices they speak about of lifting up the Kundalini, awakening it up, and then uniting it with Supreme Consciousness present here. Shvetashvatara-Upanishad, this Upanishad is really the Upanishad of the Tantra traditions. Because what the Tantra traditions also, they have to show that they have some basis in the Vedic traditions, and so they use Shvetashvatara-Upanishad, and that's why Shvetashvatara-Upanishad, this Upanishad specifically, is quoted. All of the Upanishads are quoted by great Tantra masters, but this is really, it speaks about Shiva and Shakti, so that's why the Tantra masters, they very often, they quote this Upanishad. Okay. Now consciousness, this radiant one, Deva, as it is called, which later on this Upanishad will refer to as Shiva. Shiva simply means auspicious, the auspicious one. Shakti means potential, and Shiva means auspicious. That's all. Shakti, the Sanskrit word Shakti means potential, and Shiva means auspicious, extremely peaceful, auspicious. That's why also sometimes Shankara, the word Shankara also simply means peacemaker, the creator of peace. Kara means creator, and Sham means Shanti, peace. So that's what sometimes Mahadeva, the supreme radiant one, as I explained last time, our senses are also radiant because reveal the external world. Our mind is also radiant because it reveals the external world. The intellect is also radiant because it allows us to comprehend. But the essence of all of these, which is consciousness, that is considered the supremely radiant one, the inner light. And that is Mahadeva, the supremely radiant one. So all these different words, they refer to the same entity. And it is this consciousness which alone is understood, which alone, this is important, eka, one, it's one. It can never be two. It can never be many. Consciousness cannot be divided. Thoughts which arise in consciousness, objects which arise in consciousness, the objects which are illuminated by light produce all these different colors and these different perceptions, but light in itself is one and the same. And the same thing is true about this light of consciousness. It is one. It can never be two or many. So, first of all, who? So who refers to the Deva, the radiant one, the luminous essence present within every living being. So as they entered within themselves in meditation, they saw these two very distinct entities. One, this Shakti, this potential, this energy, and then also consciousness. Both of them, they are, when we look within ourselves, these are the two fundamental entities which we find within ourselves. Energy and consciousness, these two. So now he's talking about that second aspect, that consciousness aspect, which is the key subject matter of this Upanishad, because we have to keep in mind that this is a Shaiva Upanishad, which means the key subject matter of this Upanishad is Shiva, which means consciousness. There are also some other Upanishads, which are Shakta Upanishads. Their key subject matter is Shakti. So for example, if you read Devi Upanishad, there the central theme is Devi, the Divine Mother, Mahashakti, which is just again a feminine word for the same supreme energy of consciousness. But instead of referring to it by a neutral term or here by a masculine term, Shiva is a masculine term, Devaha is a masculine term. All the adjectives that have been used here are Yaha, he who, Ekaha, the one. They are masculine terms. So this Upanishad uses masculine terms. There are Shakta Upanishads which use completely feminine terms. There, all the adjectives which will be used for the same entity will be used in feminine gender. Ultimately, both of them are speaking about the same essence, but language has this duality. As an author in English language, I'm having a problem right now. He, she, which pronoun to use? He or she? So then you have to use both. Or say, replace it with something more like, sie. People do this as well. Or they, So in language, this duality exists. And masters have tackled this duality very simply, that they say that, first of all, it's not duality, it's in fact triality. Because in Sanskrit language, there are three genders, not only two genders like in English language, there are three genders. So in Sanskrit, it's even more complicated. You have to deal with three genders: male, female, and both, or not both, or however you want to. But I'm glad that in modern times we are now living in a time where this third gender is really slowly, which was being discriminated against, is now being integrated into the society, and social acceptance is being generated. This is really a very beautiful aspect of our times. But yes, so what the Upanishadic masters say, that there are three aspects of consciousness: the deeply personal, the intermediate, and the completely manifest. These three aspects of consciousness. And the deeply personal aspect of consciousness is my mind, which no one has access to. And that's why it is deeply personal. What's right now going in my mind, even if I'm speaking about the Upanishads, maybe my mind is thinking about something very different, which I shouldn't be thinking of, but that is deeply personal. No one out of 7 billion people is ever going to know what else I'm thinking about right now, unless I let them know. This is deeply personal, and as far as I know, I don't think that there is any instrument by which that can be noticed by anyone. So it's deeply personal. That's the deeply personal layer of consciousness. Then there is this intermediate layer of consciousness, which is the prana layer. So the first layer was manas, the mind, and the second layer is prana. Prana is somehow also personal, but it can also be revealed to the next person if the next person comes close enough. So if I'm lying on my bed, from afar, nobody would know whether I'm alive or dead. So if they have a doubt, they would have to come close and feel my prana. And if some breath is coming out, in and out, then, so prana is something that is again deeply personal. I feel it all the time. But the other people will have to feel by coming very close to me. So it's that intermediate thing. And the third aspect of consciousness is vak, speech. Speech is totally manifest. When I say something, everybody hears it. If I say it loud enough, people very far away can know what is going on in my mind. So that's the third aspect of consciousness. Now what masters say, that the deeply personal aspect of consciousness, the word that is used for that is the neutral word, because manas is neuter in Sanskrit. The Sanskrit word for mind is used in neuter gender. The Sanskrit word for prana is used for masculine gender, and the Sanskrit word for speech is used in feminine gender. So you have all the three genders expressed, and what masters say, that all the neutral terms used for consciousness refer to manas, all the masculine terms used for consciousness connect to consciousness through prana, and all the feminine terms of consciousness refer through vach. So it doesn't matter ultimately which gender we are using. But still, when the Upanishads speak about meditative practices, there are all these three different possibilities. One can meditate on Brahman, which is a totally neutral concept. Brahman word itself is a neuter term. It's neither masculine nor feminine. One can choose a masculine concept, such as Shiva, which is a masculine word. Even the representation is a male representation. It's just again for the sake of meditation, just so the mind can easily focus on it. And the third, which is Shakti, the female representation, that too exists in the Upanishads. These are completely an individual, because the masters say that the Ishta Devata, the chosen divinity, its qualities and its form should be completely free for a sadhaka, for a practitioner to choose according to their own inclination. However, a person, whatever divinity, form of the divine, male, female, neuter, formless, whatever a person feels inclined to, that is what they should choose for themselves. Because that inclination, that very natural inclination, is what a meditation practitioner then has to develop further. There is some already inclination. I like this form. I love this form. When I look at Ganesha, I just feel, how beautiful he is. Or some people feel it for Krishna, some people feel it for the Divine Mother. When they look at it, they feel some attraction towards it. And that attraction then has to be further built up. But that attraction has to be there. And that is what leads a person to choose what in the Tantra practices is known as Ishtadeva. So there are, for example, Kula Devas, which means the deities of my clan, in the family into which I am born. They have their. Then there are Grama Devatas, the deity of the village into I am born. But they don't decide what is my personal deity. That is what I have to decide, what I have to choose, the name and the form which I want to choose for myself. This Upanishad is a Shaiva Upanishad. So that's why here we will see the first 10 Upanishads used all neutral terms. Brahman was the term. Brahman, pure consciousness, the supreme. It was a neutral term. Always that term was used. In this Upanishad, we find masculine term. If one goes to the Shakta Upanishads, then one finds totally feminine terms. So my point is to show that the Upanishads are gender neutral. And I think the only teachings that are really gender neutral in this sense. Okay. And that is why last time when I talked about, it was a long time ago when I was speaking that mostly the feminine word comes first and the masculine word comes later in the Indian traditions. Because according to Sanskrit grammar, the one that you should respect more should be mentioned first. So that's why Radha Krishna. Radha comes first, Krishna comes second. Shakti is always comes first. And the masculine aspect is always second. Even mother, father, Mata Pitri in Sanskrit. Mother is first, father is second. So it's always, this is a general rule that the feminine aspect is given more respect than the masculine aspect. In most cases, that is really the case. But then Ekta, she made me aware of one place where Shiva Shakti. In Shiva Shakti, usually Shiva comes first. Shiva comes first. So it's always Shiva and then Shakti. Wherever you see it written in Rishikesh, Shiva Shakti Trust up there, it's always Shiva first, Shakti comes second. And this really was like, okay, that's quite strange. Shiva Parvati, for example. Shiva Parvati, there also Parvati is second. But then when I searched deeper for it, then what I saw, that the ancient masters like Gaudapada, for example, Shankaracharya's grandmaster, Shankaracharya's master, which means 6th century, he always uses Shakti Shiva. He always uses Shakti first. So what seems to be there, the case is that depending on the tradition, if you are within the Shaiva tradition, you will obviously emphasize more on Shiva and you will say Shiva Shakti. But if you are from a Shakta tradition, like Shankaracharya's Grandmaster Gaudapada, because he has written beautiful hymns dedicated to the Divine Mother. He will always, for him, Shakti is the supreme essence, so he will first put Shakti first. He will not say Shiva Shakti, he will say Shakti Shiva. In words like Shiva Parvati, the problem is different. There is another Sanskrit rule which overrides this rule of respect. If you have more letters, then it has to come later. Even if it's the respected one. And Shiva Parvati, unfortunately, Parvati has more letters. That's why even if there is more respect to her in the combination, it will come later, grammatically. That's a grammatical rule in Sanskrit. So, just to show that how the different masters. So, even if Shiva Shakti today can be seen everywhere, extremely ancient masters, they have also used Shakti Shiva, which means the first word, Shakti. More respect has been given to Shakti. But in all other cases, it's very clear-cut. Lakshmi Narayana, Sita Rama, Radha Krishna, everywhere the feminine manifestation's name comes first. Even in Prakriti Purusha, it's always Prakriti first and Purusha later. Maya Brahma, Maya first, Brahma second. Maya Shabala Brahma, always the feminine word comes first. Okay. But even if the focus of this Upanishad is on Shiva, the journey starts with Shakti, as we can see. So even here, first Shakti is being mentioned, and then the whole Upanishad focuses on Shiva. But the journey starts with Shakti. And the same thing one can find in the 10 Upanishads. In the very beginning, in the second Upanishad, in the very beginning, when the radiant beings look for Brahman, the path that goes through Shakti. So there also, in the very beginning of the 10 Upanishads, even though the main topic of the Upanishads is Brahman, the path goes through the mother. So to say that if you want to know your father, then you have to ask your mother. To put it in simple terms. Only the mother can tell us about our father. And this is also as a beautiful story in one of the Upanishads where Satyakama Jabala goes to his mother and asks that my master has asked me. Unfortunately, his father must have been separated. So when he was asked about his father, he goes running to his mother and says, "You never told me about my father. Who is my father?" So there also, through the very story, the Upanishad shows that the father ultimately can only be known through the mother. The child, no one needs to tell the child about the mother. No one needs to do that. That's very natural. That's very natural part of the upbringing. That's the first essence that a child comes to know. But then the mother, Papa, Papa, Papa. And like this, slowly and slowly, she ingrains that this is your father, this is your father, this is your father. That's why mother is considered the first teacher. Whenever we speak of the teachers, then usually the category is that the teacher who teaches you the Vedas, 100 times more is the teacher your father, and 100 times more the teacher of your father is your teacher, the mother, the highest teacher, the supreme teacher. That is the level. Even as a teacher, when the masters speak of guru, then the mother is supreme. And the same thing when we speak about Deva, God, then the first teaching is always Matri Devo Bhava. Mother, let mother be like Deva, like a divinity for you. Let Father be like a divinity for you. Let your teacher be like a divinity for you. And then come other divinities. But it starts from the mother, the very source of our existence. Okay. So who alone presides over all the causes which were listed above. So in the understanding of this Upanishad, the different causes that were listed, and we discussed them in the second mantra in our previous sessions, time, etc., destiny, chance, elements, this one presides over all of them. So this, because consciousness is so subtle that if everything has come out of the most subtle, then this must be the supreme. Consciousness really must be the supreme. So in the understanding of this Upanishad, consciousness is more subtle and therefore beyond the other causes which were readily perceivable to these masters back then, as they started to have the discussion about exploring the very cause of this universe. And what they were in fact most interested in was this physical body. For them, instead of exploring the world out there, it was to explore this physical body. So the very cause of this, the ultimate cause of this physical body. So consciousness they saw as the one that presides over, tishtati, adhi. Adhi means above. Adhi means above. And it has been explained by masters in various ways, because what the masters say that the mind works like a mirror, an example that comes up again and again repeatedly, that the mind works like a mirror and the light gets reflected in it. And that tiny little reflection in a mirror, for example, if you have 10 mirrors and you hold them in the sun, then the sun is being reflected in them. So you have 10 reflections. These are the 10 individual consciousnesses present within all these physical bodies. But the light which is present all around them, that is one and the same. This is the picture of consciousness that the masters have. Now, if I'm being reflected in 10 mirrors, then I'm literally the Lord of those mirrors. I raise my hand, all the reflections in those mirrors raise their hands. If I put it down, that on the other side, in Paramarth Niketan, I don't know if it's still there, you have these big statues, and then on both sides you have 2 mirrors. And if you, as a child, I loved to look into those mirrors. What you could see this statue going endlessly in both directions. Like thousands of statues on this side and thousands of statues on this side and in the center. And with that, you even saw yourself, thousands of Siddharthas on both sides. So when my father used to go to give discourses there back in the 80s, this was my favorite game, to run away from the discourse and look at myself, thousands of Siddharthas on both sides in the river. And I used to make faces, and all of them used to make also those faces. So it is in that sense, if sometimes the word Isha, Lord, is used, it is in that sense. It is in that sense that's why this inner ruler, the one that rules all by being present within them. And that is consciousness, because ultimately consciousness is what guides us. Prajnanetraha. We all are guided by the eye of consciousness. Without that, we would be completely blind. Even if we are externally blind, but the light of consciousness is present, then we can have great masters, great guides. One of the greatest scholars of modern times in India, Swami Gangeshwarananji Maharaj, my father's master's master, he was totally blind from birth. And he had all the Vedas, he had memorized all the Vedas. And he could speak for hours and hours together without ever referring to any book, because he was blind. But he could quote them. And he traveled throughout the world, establishing the Vedic books in all the different places. There is a big Veda temple in Ahmedabad where our beloved President of the United States was yesterday. Mr. Trump visited that city. So there is a temple constructed by him. In the United States itself, he constructed a temple, despite being blind. And more than, I think, 400 Vedic books were established in different places, including at the library of the Vatican. Yes. And of course, in 2 places in Bali, which I have visited, Vedaniketan on the other side, Shivananda Ashram here, our ashram in Switzerland. Everywhere he established the books of the 4 Vedas, but completely blind. So if the inner eyes of consciousness and awareness are open, then it doesn't matter whether the external eyes are there or not. That's the point which I was trying to make, just to create a distinction between the light of consciousness which gets expressed through the eyes. It is again the same light which is expressed through the eyes, but it can also be present without some of these external lights or without many of these external lights. My father's favorite example, the lady whom he really liked very much, was Helen Keller, whom he had met a few times, found was deeply influenced by her presence. Someone who, as far as I understand, she could not speak, she could not see, she could not hear. So there was basically no communication. And yet when she came to India, the Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, himself had welcomed her. That's the kind of work that she had done in the world. So this is what I'm pointing at. That inner light of consciousness, which when energy is guided by that, really guided by that, then it can bring about miracles. So it is that light of consciousness that we are talking about. It is that Deva which we are talking about, which in that sense, it's not like there is a king somewhere up there which is ruling over everything, but simply because energy and particularly its evolutes seem so devoid of consciousness. So when that consciousness is manifest in the midst of these otherwise unconscious entities and starts guiding them, then something amazing arises. It is in the union, in the total union of these two, consciousness and energy, that great miracles take place. And it is this what this Upanishad is about. And it is in that sense that consciousness presides over everything else, over all the causes listed above. So all of them, as I explained when we were discussing the second mantra, all of them are considered as causes, but they have limited scope. Consciousness, and I even showed how chance and destiny, even though they are so mutually exclusive in the understanding of the masters, they work together. So all those works, all those causes, they do work together. Indeed, undoubtedly, that's not being negated. But consciousness is beyond all of them. Energy is beyond all of them. These two are completely beyond them. And because these two are the supreme, the idea of this Upanishad is, let us explore them further. And how to explore them further? Where would the journey start? Where would the journey start? It would start by exploring this body. That's where all meditative journeys start. Whether it is the Buddha's meditative journey, if one reads Satipatthana Sutta, the teachings of Buddha on mindfulness, it starts by being mindful of the body. Vipassana, which is Vipassana starts by Kayanupassyana. Vipassana means deep insight. But where does it start? Where does Vipassana start? It starts from Kayanupassyana, being mindful of the body. That's where it starts. And then comes Anapanasati, which means mindfulness of breath. In the Buddhist path it's slightly different. There is no, to influence it, to change it. Yes, so there is no, it's just natural flow, just being mindful of the natural flow. On the yogic path, alteration is done. First of all, of course, it's also just mindfulness of breathing, just not doing anything. But later on, as the yogic practitioners go deeper, they also change it. So it's slightly different. The Buddha goes further. He does not go into those details of yoga. But mindfulness of breath, even the Buddha cannot avoid it. So that is what then leads to. So the journey always, in the same way like in the Upanishads, the meditative journey always starts with the Annamaya Kosha. This is now the 11th Upanishad, but in the 7th Upanishad, Annamaya Kosha, the material layer. Then comes the prana layer, then comes the thought layer, then comes the intellect layer, and then comes the unconscious layer, the layer of the unconscious. And then comes the innermost essence. But the journey always again starts from the material layer. In Ashtanga Yoga, it's the same. It starts with, first of all, external practices. External, how we deal with others, that's the outermost layer. How I deal with others, that's yama. How I behave in my personal life, that's niyama. And then I start with my physical body. Awareness of the physical body, asana. And within that, then pranayama is also introduced. All the different aspects of yoga are introduced. But the journey always starts there. That's where our awareness, when we look at ourselves, if I want to understand myself, the first thing that I see, without settling down my mind or anything, is my body. So the awareness of this body should be used to cultivate yoga. And by this what I mean, what is the definition of yoga given by Patanjali? The reduction of mind's modifications, which means the mind thinks about so many things all the time. Give it one object, your body. Start there, which you can see. Give this as an object to it, and with the help of that, reduce other modifications, which means reduce thoughts about other things, about the world out there. This is what we try to do in our asana practice. By simply being with our body, by focusing, we are training our mind to focus, to be attentive, to be mindful. That is what yoga is about. That's why asana is yoga. If that is the goal. If that is not the goal, if the goal is something else, then of course it's anything but yoga. But if that is the goal, to cultivate attention of the body, of the different parts of the body, then asana is perfect example of yoga. So that's why now the next mantra, which is an extremely detailed and complicated and a condensed summary of the different ideas that were very prominently present at least at the time when this Upanishad was composed, 300 BC, 2300, in its present form, the different yogic practices related. The next mantra, because see, consciousness is one, but then it becomes many. And this many is being presented first in the next mantra. And the image that is being used here, because with the help of pictures, it is easier for us to remember something. If we can picture something coherently, then it becomes easy to picture, to remember it. So what the masters have done, that they have taken two images. This Upanishad is the Upanishad of images. One could really, if there would be a painter, he could paint many beautiful concepts found in these Upanishads beautifully. What this Upanishad does is that it's the Upanishad of paintings. It describes paintings and different sections in the Upanishads. The next two mantras, the first one describes what it wants to describe as a wheel, in the form of a wheel, a rotating wheel. What is important here is movement, journey through time, journey in space. And the two images that the masters here think of is either the image of the river, which also constantly travels from the higher Himalayan mountains up to the ocean. So that is one possibility, or then the wheel. So the fourth mantra presents the image of the wheel and chakra, and the fifth mantra presents the same idea in the form of river, a flow, which is maybe more prominently present in the yogic texts, such as Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. For example, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra very much represents the flow of mind with a mirror, with a river. And that's why it is referred to as Chitta Nadi, the river of the mind, like thoughts. Okay. The problem with this mantra is that this Upanishad never explains the meaning of the numbers present in this 3, 16, 50, 20, 6 sets of 8. All of them, the Upanishad itself does not explain it. And most likely the reason is that they must have been so widely known at that time that the teachers saw no need of explaining it. But the later commentators, when they started writing commentaries, and I think we, at least traditionally, we hope and believe that whatever they are presenting was part of what is known as the oral tradition, Mukhagama, oral tradition, and that's why in the commentary what we find, even though it's of later origin, and it beautifully corresponds. There are sometimes some little minor differences, but it's there. And this is culturally, I would say, I always liked also to show. So has anyone been to Konark you have been in Utkala, which means in Odisha? Has anybody visited the Sun Temple, the Grand Sun Temple of India? It's a great tourist attraction these days. Has anyone? Maheshji only, of course. Mataji is with me. I with her. And yeah. It's on the ocean beach, on the Bay of Bengal, not very far from the ocean. Very big temple of the sun. Very big temple, and it's in the form of a chariot. And you can usually, all around in tourist literature, you can see that big wheel, which comes in fact from that sun chariot, because I think that temple contains the most intricate carving of a chariot wheel, really detailed and extremely beautiful. And so many tourist magazines and tourist guidebooks, they have pictures of that wheel. It's one piece of rock. It's huge, and I think it's one piece of rock. So it's huge. Yeah, much bigger than this. Really big and beautifully intricate carving of it. And so one can really relate this to that. And also, I would say that the Tibetan Buddhist masters, which I also pointed out earlier, they have these beautiful tankas of the wheel of existence, held by Kala, death, in its teeth. And it's not exactly the same. This would be a very ancient version of that, but there are many common concepts which are just, the symbols are different there, but they are speaking about the same thing. And it's one of the most favorite tankas from Tibetan Buddhism, which people really love to buy, sell, have at their homes. Okay. Now, why do we start with this description of a human body? The masters say that sometimes when the moon or the star that we point at is very subtle, the easiest thing is to point at something which is closer. So, for example, the moon today is very thin or very subtle. The person standing next to you, or you want to point out a very Arundhati Tara. Arundhati is a star which is very subtle. You really have to focus to see it with your naked eyes. So, but if the masters want to point it out, and this was in fact part of a ritual to test the vision of the groom at the time of marriage, that he had to identify the Arundhati Tara at night. During the marriage ceremony, he had to identify that Arundhati, which is a very, very subtle. But if he's struggling to find it himself, then the astrologers have to help him. And then what do? They say, okay, you stand here and now look at that particular shakha. What is shakha? No. Shakha. Tree, branch of the tree. Do you see this branch of the tree? Look at this branch of the tree. Look at this. Just focus on this branch of the tree, and then go at the tip of this branch of the tree, and then look there very carefully. You will see it. You will find it. So that's how, with the help of something which is so close and so big, but very clearly perceivable, then the very subtle, which otherwise is not readily seen by the eyes, is then seen. And even if he then still says that, oh no, I cannot see it, then the bride usually would say, okay, that's it. I'm not going to get married to you. Most likely, that's what I suppose must have happened. that was the origin of, that's most likely the origin of why should I get married to a person who you already can't see clearly. Okay. That was part joke and part reality. But it was part of the ancient ritual, marriage ritual. And there were like this, different marriage rituals. So the same thing here masters point out, that this body, for those who are not, for those for whom consciousness is too subtle to grasp, let them start. And if I want to sit down in meditation and I have nothing to grasp, then where will I focus my attention to? Then I need something tangible to start with. And that is why the masters choose the physical body. This is the very first, the grossmost layer of my being, and so this is the first object of one's attention, to train oneself to focus, and then the object has to be reduced. The second one is prana, the third one is the mind, the fourth one is the intellect, and like this, the journey continues. But for the sake of dharana, which means holding one's attention on one chosen object, this is where the journey. Even when we worship statues in temples, the entire ritual starts with asana. The very first thing that a priest or someone who is worshipping a statue, he has to sit down in an asana. So the first thing is awareness of an asana, of his own body, and then comes pranayama, awareness of the prana, and then the deity which is present within oneself, it is evoked in the statue in front of you, and then the rituals start. But the foundation is asana and pranayama. Even if the priest just do it very quickly, but they have to do it. It's part of every temple ritual. Because these temple rituals, they are nothing but just external enactments of meditative processes. That's all. Just by creating a duality to make it a little bit more easier. That's all. So we will come to this mantra. This was just a little bit like a preface to this next mantra, but we will study this next mantra properly in our next session, which will be on Saturday. Okay. Any questions? Any quick questions? Then. Yes. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about when that happened and how that happened?
As we can see, it already started very clearly in 300 BC, as we can see in this very Upanishad. Because Sankhya, generally the date of Sankhya is considered 900 BC. The origin of Sankhya is by modern historians. Now I'm just talking because when we start speaking about history, then we have to speak about the dates given by modern historians based on available evidence, based on available texts, which is a very small portion. But they believe that Sankhya has its origins in 900 BC. And here in this Upanishad, very clearly, in this very line, is the very self of the radiant one. We can already see a diversion. Even though this Upanishad is deeply influenced by Sankhya, and the whole concepts which are about to come in the fourth one, they are all structured on the Sankhya philosophical system, yet this diversion in a very important point already is very clearly visible here. And this just continued over the years. With Brahma Sutra, approximately maybe 3rd, 4th century, Brahma Sutra, which systematically presents the teaching of the Upanishads, it's known as Brahma Sutra, a very highly respected text. That from the 5th century, it really starts attacking Sankhya ideas which were found to be against or in opposition to the Upanishadic ideas. So that, and then comes Shankaracharya. He really, one can literally say that he hammers in the final nail in the coffin of Sankhya philosophy as it was understood. After that, there is no tradition. No. But as I point out again and again, Vedanta is just a specific understanding of Sankhya itself. But Sankhya, it's no more identified as Sankhya, it transformed into Vedanta with some very important changes. And that Vedanta, like before the coming of Vedanta, Sankhya was the most influential way of thinking in India. Vedanta after that has been the most influential way of thinking, and it influences everything that we see in India. It's really the core philosophy of all the different thoughts and ideas, other than Buddhist and Jain. That's all. So these three would really be. So this transformation from Sankhya and to Vedanta, the culmination can be seen in the 8th century with Shankaracharya. But it started already very clearly in the time of this Upanishad, 300 BC. So it was a gradual transformation, but it took maybe around 1,000 years, but it was very gradually happening. So at the time of the Buddhist Mahayana traditions, you can find both. You can find Sankhya more prominent and Upanishads, which means Vedantins, less prominent. But after Shankaracharya, Vedantins become most prominent. And Sankhya sort of, we still study it, but we don't, no one practices it. No one has any belief in it anymore. It's no more a living belief, let's say. That's the difference. Yes. Okay. If any other questions, you can still ask me, but let's conclude this session. सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः. In fact, just to answer your question again, Vedanta should just be seen as a substream of Sankhya. It's a substream, but there were many substreams. Different substreams were prominent at different times, and Vedanta became prominent very clearly in the 8th century. But from its very origin, it has its origin in Sankhya. Like Buddhism also, because Buddha had Sankhya teachers. So Buddhism ultimately also has its origin. So Buddhism itself has to be seen as a substream of Sankhya. Vedanta too is a substrate.